take a break from Nations in Arms and play Source of the Nile. Source of the Nile, this is one of them old Avalon Hill ones. It's about the exploration of Africa. And it's a weird sort of adventure type game, more than, it's certainly not a war game. Hexes be damned or whatever, they just happen to, the hex grid just happens to express directions in a better way than most things. You can do the same with bricks, but anyway. You start the game off, and the coastline and part of sort of the Saharan desert is already drawn on the map. Most of this is going to be for sub-Saharan Africa exploration, and the goal of the game is basically to find stuff in Africa and maybe to do, you know, some cool routes and whatnot as well. Fix that. Okay. Let's talk about the components. The board is the most significant of all the components. It's mainly blank. You're going to be drawing on it with these three crayons, which are dry erase type crayons. Did they say that on them? They say made in the USA. But they're called wipe off. This may be the first game that used them. I thought Damfrost might have beaten it out. The idea of like markers on a board or whatever. No, wait. Jeez, I don't know. Now I got another one in mind, which is Triplanetary. But a few games came out in this sort of late 70s period that used drawing on the map. And I don't know which one was the most clever. Now this came out officially in 78, but I don't know if that was the first edition or if it was the Avalon Hill edition. Because it was designed out of house, but by this Discovery Games. But I've never heard of anybody having the original edition of it. I'm sure somebody does. But anyway. So in terms of that, you're going to be drawing on it with these kind of images using the markers. You have a nice terrain key here, which tells you the number, the chance of being lost moving through that space, a random number, which is, I think, used in the advanced game. I have never actually played. They separated into Game 1 and Game 2. Every time I look at Game 2, it looks like it doesn't really add anything except some complexity without actually making the game any better. It changes the randomness factor. These are the Game 1 charts. Now, they're rather tinily written, some of them almost unreadable now. Things to deal with natives. This is for illness recovery. Should be called Sores on the Nile. There's not a lot of disease, and certainly no communicable stuff that passes through your party. Activity level, this is going to determine how fast you move, but also it impacts your chance of getting lost and other factors. We've got different modes of movement listed and what they can do. This is going to handle interaction with natives, both the initial contact and any necessary attacks that happen. This continues that with negotiation here. Results of victory or defeat that happen to you. Sometimes, quite often, you'll find yourself hunting for fresh food. These long journeys that the game covers, you're not going to be able to consistently, you can't just carry everything you need. So actually you will probably be doing mainly hunting, but you don't want to run out of food. You can pick up food from the natives as well. You got the sequence of play copied on here. All very helpful stuff. This is a little die roll chart to determine direction in some cases. That's the most important thing in the game. Take a look at these. Each player has a set of these. I haven't figured out how many players I'm going to do. It's probably how many sheets I've got separated out. Looks like I'll probably play it in 4. I don't know. Ow! 3 or 4 probably. The game will hold up to 6 players. It's kind of cool in a lot of players, but each turn is going to be a series of cards flipped over, and we'll talk about that in a bit. That's this big old deck, and no, they're not poker quality cards. They're like this old Status Pro baseball cards and whatnot. You have so the different markers, you have caches in case you want to hide some goods or whatever. Somewhere in here you have the explorer himself, and then you have a bunch of these basically blank color markers, which when you draw a space, you put one of those color markers on, and that indicates that you know about that space but nobody else does. And when you get back to Europe, you'll be able to publish that space, which is how you get victory points in the game. And if somebody else goes into it, they basically put their marker on top of it as well to indicate that they also know what it is and can publish it ahead of you. Which is a good reason to stay away from other players, but on the other hand, maybe if you're more clever than other players, you can create an expedition that can get in and out and publish stuff and, you know, catch it ahead of the other players and steal their victory points. But that's a dangerous, dangerous way to play. Basically what you're saying is that, okay, one of the 2 of us is going to do okay, you know, and the other one's going to get screwed. And the one who does okay may not actually do better than other players because the movement through a space that you haven't explored is just as hard regardless of whether somebody else explored it as well. You might just be able to steal some of their advantages that way. These are, I think they're kind of optional, but they don't seem it in the rules. There are a bunch of counters. You put these face down on the map, and 4 of them are something that you want to discover that are going to be worth points. And then the rest of them are just blank on the other side, and they indicate that somebody found something, you know, that nothing was found in that space. And these are used to record the different native tribes. They're all individually numbered, and you'll be using them over on this game log. Let's talk about the game log. The game log allows you to describe your expedition. And you collect up different numbers of people, different numbers of mounts, equipment that you're going to carry with you, and this one here should be canoes. It's not written on there. Any caches that you put on the board, they have a number on them. You record what's in them there. You may not be able to find it again. It may be gone. Tribes you find ID'd by this number, and you indicate the base size of that tribe, whether or not it's friendly, whether you fought it, if you got anything special, and how it feels about you. These are specific discoveries you have to note down, like a high waterfall or something like that. Very quickly, many that you'll find aren't worth shit. But if you publish early, they might be worth something. However, these discoveries only count if they win you the game when you publish them. You're not allowed to take the victory points for them. You're allowed to publish them, and then they become, you know, the first highest at that time that's known about. But they're only allowed to be scored if they win you the game. There's other things you might find that are scoreable as soon as you find them. And you got to kind of keep a record amongst all the players through these sheets as to who's found what, because only the first person who publishes something, whether it's a hex or a special animal or something like that, is able to score the points for it. This is your collected victory points that you've already published. And then over here, these are different types of character classes, essentially. And they do have different advantages in the game, but they also have, and some of them are baked into the deck, but they also have different scores that they get for what they discover and whatever, including for these chits. So some are more important to certain players than others. And I'm going to say that not much attempt has been made to balance everything in the game, and I don't have a lot of trust that these are balanced. I know the Geologist is a very good one, for example. Okay, and now the mystery. What are these cards like? Well, I already told you what they're like quality-wise. They're just, you know, kind of a moderate stock. But oh boy, there's a lot of information on them. And we'll get to these as we, you know, within the sequence of play. But basically, on your turn, you're going to draw a sequence of cards. You do something, you like move a hex, and then you draw a sequence of cards to see what you found in that hex that describes, you know, what you're going to draw on the map, any special discoveries or whatever you find. But going briefly through the thing, at the beginning of your turn, I think you draw for a disaster to see if something horrible happens to you. Or good. It can be good. The map ones are going to describe what you draw on the board, and the terrain might extend local terrains that are near it. River describes how you generate the rivers that come from it. The cataract is just something that you draw as kind of an additional discovery in each hex. Spectacular discovery, if you find a mountain, if you're in a mountain or a large lake, or if you've got a cataract, you draw the spectacular discoveries for each of those that you have and write those down if they're of importance. You draw a card to see if you discover natives in a hex. I believe you also draw a card to see if you get any bonus findings in the hex, and that's based on the character type that you're playing. Now in the game 2, the biologist goes away and the zoologist becomes both biologist and zoologist, which feels really weird. I don't know if something in the random tables has made them less balanced, like they're no longer as good as they were. Zoologist is not bad because they have a bonus in shooting weapons and hunting and stuff like that. The biologist is pretty iffy, but you kind of, I don't know, you're a naturalist, I guess, instead. And then finally, the last thing there is the free ticket. That's not always what it is. This is your donation, okay? So it either gives you an amount of money or it gives you a free ticket. These are always going to be good things. They're used after you return to Europe or in game 2 from the beginning of the game, which makes the game really, really tough. And they allow you to collect up the money and goods for an additional expedition. Your first expedition in game 1 starts, you have $1,000, and they give you some sample expeditions over here somewhere that they suggest, that I do not suggest, but whatever. We may end up using those just to kind of test them out. But what we're gonna learn through play is that what you really want is probably a canoe expedition, and you don't necessarily want the proportions of stuff that the canoe expedition there has. That the game actually rewards certain things much, much more than certain others. Okay. There's the Explorer. I didn't show you one of those. Like I said, I haven't sorted the counters. I'm not going to sort them all. Right. So at the beginning of the game, each player picks a color, a sheet, and which class they want to be. Now, you're going to have $1,000 to start your expedition, and you secretly write down which port, these things, that you want to go to. This makes the whole situation of, am I going to be near someone else, really, really random and dangerous, right? So there are useful places to start. Down in the Cape is kind of cool because that's the only place you can start with horses. Up here at Khartoum is the only place you can start with a camel expedition. Foot expeditions are really problematic because you don't have the material, you don't have the carrying capacity. You're going to be relying entirely on bearers. Horse and camel are basically the same, except camels work better in the desert, and they're pretty much like horses everywhere else. They can't enter certain terrain the horses can enter. But anyway, this idea of randomizing, of basically secretly choosing where you're going to start and what your expedition is, means that if people choose a canoe expedition, well, yeah, you could get from Cape Town to the Orange River, but the Orange River has a source here. It only really has one little thing. This number here on the river is how many river spaces there have to be. And the game is going to enforce that as much as it can. Something like the Congo here starts you really close to the river. Now, this is a cataract, so you're going to have to portage around that, which is a bit of a pain in the ass, but it's really just movement points and time. But you know that there's going to be 25 river spaces coming from that. Also, here you know there's going to be 35 river spaces coming into the Nile. Now, I gotta check because there may be like 20 already accounted for or something like that on the Nile. And remember, it has some sort of special rule. Some of these others, you know, if this is only a 10-space river, you might end up losing your water path very quickly if you're taking a canoe expedition up that river. And that's going to be kind of a pain in the ass. Now, you are allowed to take your canoes along the coast, so at least there's some capability to get to these rivers, right? Otherwise, honestly, you wouldn't be able to get to any river except this shitty little thing, which 1, 2, 3, 4 only has 2 more spaces assured to it. One of the safer places to go is probably go for the Congo, and if 2 players go out of there, maybe head down to the shittier one. But again, and what the real problem is if you're following a river, you are following probably the exact same path as the other player, which means you're really in tight competition with each other. And that's the danger of the canoe expeditions, is that 2 people end up at the same one. Now, we used to always play, look, you pick where you're going, and then the next player gets to pick, just so that they don't end up colliding, because that would be really complex. We may end up showing the effects of that collision, because I don't mind if somebody basically gets knocked out of the game. Let me pause for a bit. I know I'm going to have to run through the rules. I'm going to try to be lighter on the rules. The rules are not pleasant to read. Greenwood's not credited in this, but this is definitely a Greenwood style of rules. It's better than a lot of them. It's better than things like Republic of Rome's rules, for example. But it's still an obnoxious design from my point of view, and kind of unpleasant to read, which is one of the things I like about rules. Is I like to be able to read the rules, but I also like them to be a good reference. These aren't a terrible reference, and you're going to find yourself quite often following procedural facets right through the rules to check something up. Like, oh, what happens in this special case? You know. So I'm going to try to skip over that stuff and not go into too much detail with the stuff that I'm going to be looking up a lot. But I want to get the meat of the ideas in. Now, I've given you the broad overview of it, right? But we'll get more. And yeah, it's too fucking hot these last few days to be up in my loft, which is where I'm playing Nations in Arms. And so I'm down here enjoying what is essentially an air-conditioned basement. I mean, it's like, I don't know, with the window open and everything, it's probably about 60, 65 degrees if I leave that open all the time. It gets down, you know, more or less stays at 55 if I have it closed up, you know, subterranean temperature. Say my decision a few years back to apply for unemployment really wasn't a great one. It got, I don't know, maybe a few $100 or whatever from it. But as soon as I was on, I mean, because most weeks I just didn't want to look that hard, or, you know, couldn't find things that applied particularly well or whatever. So, you know, I collected for a few weeks, but that's it. And once I was on that list, that got me on the jury duty list, and I've been summoned twice, and I got to go in tomorrow apparently. I just checked, and yeah, I got to be there at 8:15. Great. Fucking fantastic, huh? But yeah, I mean, apparently I was under their radar before that. And, you know, I mean, it's like, I had to go in person to apply, had to hook up all kind of stuff electronically to deal with, like, getting ID for it and everything. It just was not worth the effort. And then had to cope with it on my taxes and all kind of shit that, like, just... I probably come out ahead in terms of total hours versus amount of money that I got, but Jesus. Okay. So we talked about the start here. Let's talk about what different things can do. So the cost of items is not present here. I don't know where it is. I know it's spelled out here, and I think camels cost the same as horses, so you got the costs there. It's got to be in another place. A rate of exchange is printed on player aid sheet to cover the costs. That's this. I thought. Ah, yeah. Okay, on this side, the expedition rate of exchange, this is how much things cost. So yeah, there's different information on each side. And this actually makes it so that this side of your sheet doesn't have what you need to play the game, because it doesn't have the victory point chart. That may be okay. You maybe don't need the victory point chart. You just need reference to it, just like you don't really need this. You just need reference to it, but it's kind of weird. Okay, so that's where the prices are. Let's talk about the different things. So a bearer can carry 10 things. This game, I'm trying to remember what worked in things. RuneQuest worked in things? You know, like a sword is basically a thing, a lantern is basically a thing, so you don't have to worry about weights and stuff like that. A sword, so anyway, you can carry 10 things, and like a musket is a thing in this. And you can see rations, gifts, and muskets all weigh one thing. Bonus items each have their own weight. A canoe does not weigh 15 things, it actually weighs 60. The 15 is how many, is how much each person weighs in a canoe expedition, which is it says portage cost. This doesn't only apply when you're portaging. It also applies for being in the canoe. When you actually have to portage around something, you have to figure it out separately, which becomes another thing where you have to figure out, how many trips you have to make to get your shit through. Okay. Anyway, a bearer can also paddle your canoes, and it basically takes 8 people per canoe to paddle, and you suffer a penalty if your explorer is like serving as a bearer. They can also lead up to 3 pack animals, and they can perform only one duty at a time. They either carry, paddle, or lead animals. They can't combine those duties. All right. A guide, which costs... Okay, so a bearer costs $10, a guide costs 50, and an askari, along with his musket, costs 50. A guide is going to help you dealing with the lost number and also with some of these cards. Of course, he's also able to be killed by some of the cards. So, and an askari is, one of your protection. He can do 2 things. He can help you hunt, and he can help you fight in battles with the natives. And you can never do something outside, like none of these people do something outside their capabilities. So you can't like tell an askari to paddle or anything like that. He won't do it. All right. There are also animals. Either type of animal can carry 20 items, which will be spelled out here, where we have riding and pack mounts. We have their transport capability listed here, with the multipliers, etc. But a man weighs 15 items, so a mounted man can only carry 5 extra items on his horse. Expeditions whose members are mounted on animals move faster than those on foot. That's going to be dealt with this. You have different, and I can't see if this is readable in this, but a foot expedition gets 1 movement point in cautious, 2 in normal, 4 in reckless. This is problematic because it costs 2 movement points to explore a hex. So you can't explore hexes cautiously in foot form. Whereas the other 2 forms get 2 movement points in cautious. So that's kind of helpful. This shit in coming out of my driveway or whatever, and I stepped on some of it's nasty stuff from the pine cones and everything. It doesn't feel good when I step on it. But I sweep down here, I don't know, now it's like once every 5 years or something like that. I don't know. And it was this year, but it gets messy, and I mean it's just like, yeah, so all right, let's look at the next thing. Animals can't travel in canoes, even if there's room for them. Try putting a horse on a canoe. A mounted bearer can't carry anything, but he can lead other animals. A horse can only be purchased in Durban, Port Elizabeth, or Cape Town, down here in South Africa, which means you're only going to be able to use horse expeditions from there. The camels can only be purchased in Khartoum or from tribes who live in the desert, which you can do. We've got a different set of trade values, which is how many gifts it takes to buy something. And that's going to be the sum of 2 dice. So what you can see very quickly, gifts cost $2 each, which isn't much. It's the same as rations. But like a musket costs $10. You're going to very quickly see that trading with the natives is not a great deal. And in general, you're only going to want to do it if you're in an emergency situation, or if you're in an emergency situation. But it's 2 different types of emergencies. One is you're out of, you need extra bearers or something for your canoe, or for your pack animals or whatever, or maybe extra askaris, although that's tricky because you need muskets for them. Or if you run out of food, because food is actually cheaper coming from the, let's see, if you want rations, one gift will give you X rations. Gifts and rations are worth the same amount of money, so you get a die roll of rations for each gift. So they're actually financially a good deal to carry gifts to buy rations with. And that's something to keep in mind. However, there are advantages to not having any gifts. Okay. Okay, canoes weigh 300 items. That's only important if you have to carry it around a cataract. You can't walk them. You probably can't walk them across dry ground. You might be able to, but yeah. A canoe can only travel along rivers, into or through lakes and swamps, and along the coast. Only bearers can paddle canoes or carry them, and like mounted expeditions, canoe expeditions move faster than on foot. Every member has to be in the canoe for this to work. Every member has to be mounted for the mounted expedition to give you a bonus. Rations are food that doesn't spoil, and you can get this from native camps. You can also get it at the beginning of, well, you can get it at the ports, but you need money for that, and you probably won't have extra money kicking around. Fresh food can be gotten by hunting, but it's destroyed the turn you get it. So it just feeds you or not. Non-perishable rations can be carried indefinitely. Men eat one ration per turn, or else they're starving. Animals feed themselves, except if a horse ends in the desert, it has to be given 4 rations or it dies of starvation. Now, those rations are biscuits and like dried pork and stuff that you hunt, requiring you to shoot it with a musket to hunt it. Horses aren't going to eat any of those things. You might be able to convince me that you could grind up biscuits and mix them with water and make some kind of meal that maybe the horse will eat if it's starving. Feels a little fucked up to me. Feels much more likely that you'd be able to cut grass and carry it, but that again would take way too much work. It's one of the things that I don't like about this. Animals can be shot at any turn to provide 10 rations worth of fresh food. Horses can't eat this meat. Yeah, but they can eat the salt pork or the animals that you hunted? Food can be used to acquire gifts from friendly natives, which can in turn be used in further trade. That uses the same rate of exchange. And this is kind of weird, but you can get a gift for a die roll worth of rations. Horrible deal, but if for some reason, I don't know, maybe you can't carry all the food that you have or something because you lost some people, it might be worth trash compacting your food into rations, or your rations into gifts. Gifts can be used to give to a chief to try to convince him to be friendly, or they can be used in those trades with an already friendly native, and you can buy food, camels, and canoes. And all of those are priced here, as well as hiring people. In most cases, they're going to cost you 2 dice worth of gifts, which is a very high cost. You don't want to rely on that for sure. But again, emergency situations, maybe you do. Water. You don't buy water. You can get water anywhere except in a desert where you don't have a river. Water is needed even if there's an oasis in the desert. I don't know if we have any oases on the board, but they're represented by a little blue dot like this. Might make more sense to make it green, but whatever. I don't care. Water's only needed when you enter a desert. You're not allowed to enter the desert hex if not following a river unless you have the water for all men and animals being taken in. Now you could shoot an animal or something before. Water is collected free of charge in any amount from any non-desert hex, from an oasis, or from a river. Each man drinks 3 units of water a turn in the desert. A horse consumes 8. Now this might force you to try to move quicker through the desert or something, which is also risky. A camel consumes 8 units of water per turn, or 16 every second turn. There's not a good means of recording this, but you could do something like flip your Explorer or something to indicate that his camel... I mean, camels are a rarity. Muskets. Each friendly native hired as an Askari has to be given a musket. The Askaris that you hire at the beginning of the game, their price includes their musket, but you'd have to have extra muskets for this. An Askari hired at a port is assumed to possess muskets. Yeah, you can barter muskets for gifts, which can then be used for other kind of hiring, but the natives will never have muskets for you. The explorer can perform the duties of a bearer. He can hunt and fight like an Askari if armed with a musket, but he cannot be a guide. If he debases himself by acting as a bearer, one Askari will desert at the end of each turn until he regains the remaining Askari's respect. The same turn that explorer kills a dangerous animal or gains a victory over an unfriendly native tribe, the desertions will stop. He's made his name with that group. But here's the thing. You have to be being a bearer and take the risk that you're going to start losing Askaris for you to regain their respect. 2 explorers cannot combine into a joint expedition. That gets changed in Game 2. The player aid sheet, look, it's pretty self-explanatory what you have to do and what the multipliers, etc. are. All right. To win the game, you have to have published 75 victory points in Europe. This generally can't be done on a single expedition. It's possible, but usually your expedition runs out of gas before that. And it may be, maybe not obvious that you're out of gas, but you decide to turn around, publish, and get going. Okay, the base of the sequence of play. You go clockwise around the table. Each player takes a turn. Probably not too big a deal, except right at the beginning. Well, if people are close to each other, the order of play can be kind of important, but it's not too big a deal. And you keep going until somebody reaches victory conditions. I gotta swap batteries or recharge. You know what I'm gonna do? I am going to pause here. And I just don't feel like running through the entirety of the rules. I know I'm not going to be able to play all night or anything like that because of stupid fucking jury duty. Fortunately for me, when it comes to the getting up in time, I got to, be out the door around 7. It takes about an hour to walk there. I want to make sure I get there in time, whatever. Is that I slept all day. I was hoping it would get called off. It did last time, but I thought maybe, my last name would give me the bonus. So far, I've only had to go to 1 jury duty in my life. Okay. Just more than my parents ever had, somehow. So, let's take a look at the sequence of play. First thing you do in your turn is you pick an activity level. That's going to determine your speed and risk factors. Then, you draw an event card if you're not in a port or in the Cape Colony. The Cape Colony is basically the pre-printed stuff. I don't know where specifically. I know it goes to the orange. I would kind of cut it across and say fuck it, you know. Down in the Cape. But over here you would still have to do it. You draw an event and see if something happens. Then you move your expedition. Each time you move the expedition to enter a hex that's not published, that's either not published or not previously explored by you. Basically, if it's not just printed or drawn on the map, it has to have your color counter on it. Then you have to check to see if you get lost. And that's going to use the lost number for the type of terrain. Then, you draw an event card to determine the terrain of the hex that you entered in. And I'm going to give the effects of that. So here, it says terrain 3-2 lake. What you do is you follow this, and you look in direction 3 from the piece of terrain that you're entering. If that terrain already has been drawn, you use that same terrain in that space. There are some exceptions. Then you check the second one, if there is one, and see if that terrain is there, if you still haven't filled out. If neither one of those works, you get the terrain listed there. Now, it's possible that the terrain is illegal for one reason or another, in which case you continue down the road. If none of the options work, I think you draw another card. But you may just roll for a terrain type, because we do have a numbered terrain types down there. Okay. Then you draw another event card to check to see if there's a river. A river might begin or cross a space. Quite often, because players are using canoe expeditions, because they are the best, the river you'll be following a river. So you have to deal with that in particular. Then you draw another event card to see if a native tribe. You can see you're drawing a lot of cards. This is the difference between Game 1 and Game 2, the big difference. In Game 2, you roll dice for all of this. I find the cards more convenient and quicker, and I look at the charts and I don't think that they're terribly... all they do is make it so that you don't have kind of a sort of a pre-programmed, oh, that card's gone. Anything can happen. But that's about it, and it doesn't feel worth it. If a tribe's there, then you check native strength to see how big it is. And I'm not going to go into all the details because most of this is procedural. Okay. If you entered into a hex, or if you didn't move and you occupy the hex that you're still in, you can trade or continue moving, ignoring a friendly tribe. Otherwise, you have to check a native policy and see what happens from that. Now, there's one policy that's really, really effective. I believe it's 6, an open and friendly manner with a great display of technology. But you have to be 3 or more hexes from a port or another tribe that wasn't discovered in this turn. So if there are tribes nearby, you can't pick that one. But that is just the dominant capability, if I recall correctly, on what you want to pick. Other than that, it's kind of hard. Open and friendly manner isn't bad, if I recall correctly. Natives not there isn't bad. Basically, the great technology, open and friendly, allows you to kind of awe them, and it just is the most powerful in general. There may be players, there may be character types who want to kill tribes, in which case they might have a different type of expedition. I don't find that particularly useful, to tell you the truth. That's a good way to get your expedition killed, because you will take damage every time you fight, or often when you fight. Okay. After you finish your move, at the end of your movement, you can consult the hunting table, and you keep track of what food you eat and whatever. Anything that you hunted for gets discarded if it's not eaten. Then you use the recovery table, which we pointed out before, somewhere over here. I don't know where the fuck it is. Way up there. To see if sick people die or get better. And then you draw an event card to see if you get a bonus for the location that you're in. Now, when you're in Europe, you use a different mechanism for your turns. Basically, you can publish, which gives you a fistful of cards. You then draw a free card each turn. And then you have to discard down to 5 cards and get rid of any free tickets that you have. What that means is you pretty much think about how many cards you're likely to get off of the points that you're going to publish. You don't publish them until you've drawn, maybe 5 additional cards, or you've drawn, actually you're allowed to draw the free card first, or you've drawn a ticket that you want to work with, or something along those lines. This is an option from game 2, which is that you just start off with a small expedition, maximum of 5 cards, because you're just drawing a card per turn. Well, you actually start with a hand of 5 cards, so yeah. And in turn, you each settle where you go. Given that option, I kind of feel like not secretly choosing starting locations makes sense, even though that's the base game rules. Right. Yeah. I'm just checking to see if I had something that I needed there. All right, your movement allowance is the number of movement points you have for the turn based on your activity level. You don't need to spend them all. When you're entering a published or known hex, i.e. it has your counter on it, it costs you 1 movement point to move into it. If it's an unexplored hex or unknown hex that you enter, it costs you 2 movement points, which is why a foot expedition can never travel cautiously when you're doing what you're supposed to do in the game, which is explore. Generally, you do not want to start as a foot expedition. It can happen to you, though. You're allowed to enter half hexes along the edge of the map board. This is not that big a deal. There's deserts up there. Great. They got no river in them for the most part. Canoes. When you enter or attempt to enter a hex containing swamps, it costs you 4 movement points, whether published, explored, or unexplored. This doesn't happen if you're traveling along the coast, though. A canoe expedition which has 8 or more bearers for each canoe can move its full movement allowance, but if it has less than that, if it has 4 to 7, it loses a movement point. 2 or 3, it loses 2 movement points. If it only has 1 bearer, it loses 3 of its movement points. Okay. Now remember, you only get 2 movement points for cautious. So again, if you start losing bearers, you're going to have to move at non-cautious rates. If a canoe can't muster even 1 bearer per canoe, it can drift 1 hex per turn downstream on a river. That could be really dangerous. When you come to a cataract, you have to portage around it to continue on the river. There's another... Yeah. We got cataracts the first time when you're going downstream. That's really unlikely, but it can happen. A canoe weighs 40 items. I thought it was 60. It's 40 items. I thought it was 60. And you have to use bearers to carry the canoes and your goods. Going around the cataract, each trip that you would have to do to carry all your goods will cost you 1 movement point. But don't worry about it too much. And then you have to indicate which side. Like, you could be going up here and then have to spend significant movement points to get around the cataract. Maybe that means you don't get to continue exploring or whatever, but at least you're on the other side of the cataract. If a canoe encounters a cataract in an unpublished text for the first time while traveling downstream, there's a chance of canoes going over. You roll a die, subtract 3, and that's how many canoes and all their occupants and gear and whatever that are just lost. Taking canoes downstream is dangerous over undiscovered terrain. That's a really unlikely thing to happen, though, right? Because in all cases, you're probably going to start following the river upstream. If an explorer doesn't have enough movement points to enter a hex, he can't do it. Let me just... In some cases, you may be prohibited to entering a terrain. This will be on the movement restrictions. I don't know where that is. There it is. So like a foot force can't walk out into the lake unless you have Jesus as your explorer. And he's alone because he'll let his disciples drown. Okay, when you discover the terrain of an unexplored hex, you have the option to turn around and go back. In this case, you spend the movement points to enter the hex. You draw half the terrain on the board. You just fill in like half the hex, essentially. You can change your mode of travel at any time during turn. However, this may be tricky. You may have to... Okay, if at the time of the mode change the number of movement points equals or exceeds the movement allowance of the slower travel mode, then you stop where you are. You can alter the makeup of your expedition at any time. You can discharge people. The Ascaris will take their gun with them. Bearers will leave you with the goods that they're carrying, but you have to figure out how you're going to keep going with it. That doesn't cost you anything unless they're sick. If they're sick, it costs you a victory point per person you discharge while sick. And then they talk about, hey, it seems like you would never choose anything but reckless. No. You choose the most cautious movement allowance you can move forward with generally. Except maybe overexplored stuff, sometimes that's safe. What about mapping? I told you some of this already. There are some restrictions. Desert and jungle can never be adjacent to each other. If this is going to happen, the terrain changes automatically to veldt. You don't have to look at the next number or whatever. A lake can never be bigger than 3 hexes. If you would be creating a 4 hex or a greater lake, you can't do that. And you repeat the mapping procedure starting with a new card in that case. We talked about partial exploration. You cannot publish partial explorations. If another explorer or the same explorer enters the partial explored hex, they can complete the exploration filling it in. Partial exploration is kind of weird because you don't put a chit on top of it. Which means it's kind of hard to tell sometimes who partially discovered that hex. If anybody is still alive who partially discovered it, though, it remains there until it's discredited somehow. Rivers. Rivers are particularly intriguing. All water flows from the source of a river to the mouth of a river. Ooh. That hex up there is going to be considered the mouth of the Nile, even though it's not really. If the hex being mapped has a river leading into it from an adjacent hex, it has to be determined whether the water flowing from the river into the hex or flowing out of the hex into the river. If the river in an adjacent hex can be traced by any path to a mouth, it's flowing out of the hex being mapped, i.e. downstream. If the river's adjacent hex can only be traced to a river source, the water is flowing into the hex being mapped. So if there's any way you can get to a mouth, it's considered to be going towards that. If it can't be traced to a mouth or a source, its direction will already be determined as explained in 10.3254. Let's take a look at that. Check both numbers by the map terrain. If both adjacent hexes indicated by the numbers are passable, the river will cross the hex from one hex side to the other. Yeah, I don't think that tells you what we're looking at here. But here we have, if mapped, the river always flows from the adjacent hex indicated by the first number to the adjacent hex indicated by the second number. Draw an arrow because you don't know which way the river's flowing without that arrow. Normally, you can tell. Okay. So that was the big thing that happens. Now, there's different kinds of cards, things that come up when you draw for a river. And remember, that's like the second exploration card you draw in general. So here, the first choice would be ends. And then the second choice would be crosses. If the river continues, it'll go from one hex side to the other. You check the numbers on map and see if it can do that. If it can't do that, if it can't reach to any of those, it'll end. If it's allowed, there are exceptions, mainly the drainage basin requirement. If the river ends, that's going to be a headwaters of the river, and it has to try to seek a mouth, right? So you're not going to be able to get a river that just like goes from here to here and then goes back underground or something like that. It'll turn into a swamp or a lake or something like that before it does that. And there are restrictions on that, but a river can't end, i.e. start, really, in a desert, and it gets a river source dot. If it forks, it goes into two different branches. They should be... They should have two numbers on here, but it's possible that you can't draw to them because you're going into an already explored hex or something, and that'll create like a river that branches and then comes back together. I don't see any reason why you draw that differently, like creating a little island in the middle of the hex, which they kind of talk about, but it doesn't serve any purpose. If one of the two adjacent hexes is impassable or only one number, the two branches rejoin at the other branch. That's what they're talking about there. You can change it to a river continues and draw another card if it can't work at all. Now this is situation A if there's already a river leading into the hex from one direction or the other. Situation B is if there's no river there. If you don't get a river, no river will be mapped in the hex. And these will, this is the A and B. A is there's a river there, it'll end. B is there's no, so it wasn't a secondary choice. B is if there was no river going into the hex, a river crosses, and now you have to cope with that. Yeah. River begins or extends from adjacent swamp or lake. You can kind of see how these work, and I don't really want to go too much into all of them. But you use the same card's numbers, and they should work on an open map. They just might not otherwise. Now, the restrictions on a river, it has to try to go from a source to a mouth or multiple sources to a mouth. If it's not connected to a river mouth, it cannot end if there's still a possibility that it will connect to a river mouth by any route of passable hexes. If the mapping procedure states that the river is to end, it's ignored and the procedure continues until it's mapped. Same holds true if the current end of the river contains a swamp or lake and all other adjacent hexes to the swamp or lake are impassable. If one or more rivers flow into the hex being mapped and there is no adjacent hex with passable terrain, the hex must be a lake. Even if it hasn't fulfilled drainage basin requirements, this is considered a great salt lake and replaces any other terrain there. A river already connected to a mouth can always end unless it hasn't met its drainage basin. The drainage basin requirement is this number here. The entire river system, including swamps and lakes, has to be that length. If it has to end before that, that's not allowed and you have to keep drawing. But if there's a fork or something, that fork might be the more important thing where more of the water's coming from. So then you worry about, exploring that later. If somehow there's no way that the river can make its drainage requirement and you can prove that there's no way to do it, that's allowable for it to end or whatever. The flow of water can't go around in a circle. River connected only to a swamp or lake, not yet connected to a source or mouth, is assumed to be flowing into the lake or swamp as long as the route of passable hexes can be traced from the lake or swamp to a hex which it can connect to a river mouth. If it can't do so, then the lake or the swamp will be the river's source. And we're going to stop there because my battery is running down. And I want to try to sneak in like maybe a couple hours of sleep now. Because, again, I slept all day. I went to bed after daylight. And, I woke up at around noon, which would have been perfect. But I was so tired. And I just kept going back to sleep and enjoying myself. Oh, well. About 2/3 of the way through the rules. There are still some special case issues that I want to touch on before I load this up and start playing. It's like right around midnight now, for whatever that matters, which, I got a couple hours of sleep in, which is cool. I would have liked a little bit longer, but I might get another crack at it. Some of these others I've more or less told you about. I think I was crossing over here. I don't know, this was like placed up like this. I don't know. It looks like interaction with natives, but I think it was probably discovering natives in the hex. Again, it's just a simple draw. It tells whether you find them or not. So here, for example, if in a hex containing a river or oasis, there will be natives. Then you go roll them up. Spectacular and additional. Again, you draw a card. You look. This will say if you had a cataract, you might get waterfall. If you had a lake, this will add to the size of the lake. The largest lake is probably going to be 3 hexes in size, but you might need to keep track of the second hex of lakes. And also, it's possible that early in the game, a 1 hex lake, could be part of somebody's publication if they get home early. That puts them over the top. So, they might get even a first place off a 1 or 2 hex lake. Disasters, you draw this, you read the instructions, and you take them into effect. Shooting things, I think you need a 6 normally for each Ascari and the leader if he has a gun. But zoologists, and I think this is just their own shot, kill on a 5 or 6. Not positive. But it would be really, really potent if they gave that extra bonus to everybody. Lost. This one we did not cover, and it's important. Each time you attempt to enter an unpublished hex, you have to check lost. You check the terrain key of the hex being exited. You roll a die, and if you get equal or less than the lost number, which is over on the left-hand side there, You're lost for the turn, and I guess that means you don't get to move. An expedition following a river downstream cannot get lost no matter what the terrain. An expedition following the river upstream has a lost number of 2, which probably indicates that they took, you know, a branch that doesn't really go anywhere out of the hex. If you have a guide, you subtract 1 from the die roll result. That is, I think, wrong, because to get lost you have to roll equal or less than the number, so I think it should be add 1. If the expedition is cautious, again, they say subtract 1 from the die roll. That looks wrong again. This applies even though it's not stated in the movement restrictions. If you're reckless, you add 1 to the die roll. Again, it's in the wrong direction. Interaction with natives. Okay, so this is where things get interesting. When you enter or spend the entire movement in a hex which contains a native tribe, or if you discover a native tribe, you may have to adopt a policy. If the tribe is friendly, and you'll have it marked here if it is, by its number, you may ignore the tribe completely, continuing on your way. Or you can trade with them. And if they're already friendly, you don't probably want to interact with them unless you want to kill them. If the tribe is not friendly, you have to select one of the 6 policies on the native attitude there. You cross-index the policy you pick with the activity level, and then you roll 2 dice, and you get a letter. And the letters N, you go to the negotiations table on a 3, 5, or 6. On a 1, 2, or 4, you follow the instructions on the policy itself, which are listed here. 1 is kind of an ignore. 2 is retreat. And what was the other one that we have to worry about? 4. 4 is continue the turn as though they weren't there. Policy 1 is remain in the hex but go on defensive. You may not draw for bonus or hunt in this turn. This is a really bad one. But you can leave the hex the next turn. If you really want to avoid them, it's probably the most potent for that. I never aim for that. Policy 6 is what I always go with, like I said, but we can kind of suss that out. The problem is, with some of these others, you're basically not getting any chance of making them friendly. But maybe that's for the best. Where are we? Okay, some of the other letters. C, I'll give you the native charge table. A, I'll give you the native ambush table. Ambush is bad. Charge ain't hot. But you might want to be beating up natives for some of the characters. Now, in terms of context, if there's a native tribe marker in the area, you can't wipe it out. There are an infinite number of villages in that hex, and you'll be always interacting with new villages. But once you make them friendly, you can kind of deal with them okay. And the other thing is they'll feed you at the end of any turn that you're there. They won't give you any like cured food or anything, but at least you don't have to eat. Negotiation and trade. If you took 3, 5, or 6 and get a neutral result, you have to negotiate. You determine how many gifts you want to give to the chief as a token of friendship. The less gifts, the more unhappy the chief will be. This is going to be the negotiation table here. You can give between 1 and 10. Anything more than that doesn't matter. Or you can give all your gifts. If you have no gifts, you can give them all by giving them nothing. That will automatically make them friendly. See something here? You got no gifts with you? Perfect. That's only gifts So you don't have to like give them food or guns or anything else. If the tribe is friendly, it'll be friendly to that explorer only. Other explorers must interact with them independently and keep track of them on their own sheets. Actually, the way they word it here, the explorer may give every item he has to guarantee a successful negotiation. He does not include people, personal muskets, or animals. He must give the chief everything else he has. Okay, so I think that means you have to give him all your canned food and your extra muskets. Okay, that makes it a little different. That's actually more what I remember. But once the tribe is friendly, you can start using the native exchange rates, which you roll, and you can choose not to make the deals. You may be forced not to make them. You don't have to actually trade once the price is there. Gifts must be part of all trades. To obtain additional gifts for the trade, an explorer may first trade food or muskets for gifts. Well, everything you get is given a number of gifts, so yeah. Camels can be gotten from a desert tribe if a route of desert hexes can be traced back from a desert hex occupied by the tribe to Khartoum. A small tribe can never get more than 35 gifts in trade from the same explorer. I don't know if this is covered on here. Yeah, they don't tell you how many gifts you've given. And larger can go up to 50 and 65. And they say you should record it there, but there's no space for it particularly. Once a tribe has gotten its maximum gifts, it can no longer trade, but it's still friendly. Okay. Did we get combat? We did not. So combat is going to be, you look at the size of you take a look at the number of Ascaris, possibly adding the explorer, and he'll almost always have a gun, and you get a number. You compare the size of the tribe to a die roll result, and you'll get this 3-letter code, and you find the size of the tribe within that code. And your options are D, that'll be a defeat. You'll go to consequences of defeat, which is over here. W, which is going to be consequences of victory, which can lose you some Ascaris as well. H, the natives will hide. If a 1 or 2 is selected, you follow policy instructions. Those are ones that you're not really trying to contact the tribe. If 3, 4, 5, or 6 are selected, you can ignore them. So basically you don't have to deal, and that's the only options. With these, again, you check the size of the tribe to see how many Ascaris you lose, and then you roll dice to see what you capture. On a victory, on defeat, your entire group is probably wiped out, but something may survive. Now, the explorer might be killed, and then you just, have either lost the game or you can restart with a new character. If you restart with a new character, you don't get your full allotment of money. I think you have to draw. If you're captured and held prisoner, you have a chance of getting away. And then the other is the explorer escapes, maybe with some members, so the entire group may not be wiped out. You will not come away with more members than you had or more goods than you had. Now, if you happen to capture natives, you can release them or use them as bearers. Missionaries, doctors, and ethnologists have to release all prisoners. I'm not sure that absolutely makes sense. I could see like missionaries or doctors deciding that their particular mission is more important. The ethnologist, I can almost see them too to communicate, but by this point, wanting to see them interacting in context with their people would be really important. If you lose all your Ascaris due to the consequences of victory, you end up in a defeat instead. If you might discover the native village from the victory list. If you do that, you have two options. You can keep the prisoners for bearers and or loot the village. Again, missionaries, doctors, and ethnologists can't loot. You could release the prisoners and don't loot. You get 1 victory point for selecting this option upon return to Europe, and you have to kind of mark that down. It doesn't make them friendly or anything, though. When you loot, you roll to see what you get. It might be a canoe or a camel. It's not going to be too terribly valuable, though. You do get more dice for the size of the tribe, but it's, maximum 3 dice. You're just not going to get that much. Caching stuff, you can drop stuff in a hex. You use one of your little cache markers, and you record what you got on your sheet, what's there. If you return to that hex, you might find your stuff still. Let's see. I don't remember. This is, again, something I don't do much of. On a roll of a 1, your cache has disappeared. Now, if you publish the hex with a cache in it, you publish where the cache is, and anyone else can go find it too. Old biscuits and salt pork. Yummy! They're permanent. They only are removed in the process of reclaiming it. This is actually something where if you're playing multiple games in a campaign is problematic, as will be these when we get to them, where you have to kind of add some information. My feeling is between sessions or whatever, you wouldn't clean the board up, but you'd clear the game up so you wouldn't leave all these markers on it, and you'd have to readdress them. I want a sip of coffee and to relight my pipe, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay, hunting. Here you're trying to get fresh food. You consult the hunting table at the end of your turn, I think, if you wish. It's over here. You look at the terrain type, and you get some possible column shifts there. If the activity level is 1 or 2, you add 1 to the die roll. If it's 4, you subtract 1 from the die roll. This is wrong. The activity levels don't have numbers anymore. This chart was reproduced from some earlier artifact. What I think it is if it's cautious, you add 1. If it's reckless, you subtract 1. And that gives you an amount of food per Ascari that you roll. Now, zoologists will get a bonus on the hunting table too, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure. Might be under zoologist where you pick. I don't see it there. I don't see it. Okay. I thought they got a bonus on the hunting table. But anyway, you roll a single die, and you get a multiplier of the number of Ascaris you have for how much food you produce. Now, getting a 1 isn't going to be sufficient, because you are going to have some bearers and guides in almost any expedition. Pretty much. Except after a defeat. The explorer is included in the multiplication. Anyone who's not fed has to be given non-perishable rations. Anyone who's not fed at all is going to desert. Animals can be shot, your horse and your camel, to get 10 rations of fresh food. If the explorer is starving, he becomes sick instead. Not good because he can't hunt anymore. An explorer by himself can hunt without a musket with a modification of -2 to the die roll, which in some terrain, jungle or further over, he's fine. An expedition doesn't have to consume food anywhere in the Cape Colony, which is not just the ports, or in a port Somewhere else it says about ports. Or whether it's a native. After hunting's computed, any sick members has to be cared for. You look on the recovery table. And again, none of this is too complicated over here. And you either stay sick, die, or revive. There's an improving, a -1. That's tricky. You're going to have to note that somehow. Kind of an annoyance, honestly. They can't walk and would have to be carried. They weigh 15 items. Now you can carry them in a canoe easily enough or on a horse. They can be discharged, but it costs a victory point to discharge them. Any people or animal in the desert without water will desert as though they're starving. The explorer without water will die. There's a doctor in every hex in the Cape Colony in every port. That's a modifier to that table. Do we have... I really thought there was a bonus for the zoologist on that. Bonus discoveries at the end of your turn. You draw another card and look at the bonus column. And you look for your letter set for what you are. So for example, if you're an explorer here, you discover diamonds if you're by the river. And that's a thing that you can carry. It may weigh more than one thing, though. Or less, in the case of diamonds. You make a bonus discovery if you're in a hex which has been mapped that turn, or has a native tribe you've never encountered on a previous turn. Which means you might find something in other people's hexes if there's a native tribe there. You draw an event card, check the bonus. If the conditions listed are met, the bonus is awarded. If there are no victory point awards mentioned in the bonus, you automatically receive a number of victory points equal to the roll of a die. Should be when you get back to Europe. A record of the bonus discoveries is maintained on the player aid sheet. Each tusk collected has to be returned to Europe. See, that's special. Has to be returned to Europe to gain its victory point value. It weighs 7 items. Each animal or plant has to be returned to Europe. It weighs 2 items. These are never lost due to a disaster unless there's not enough bearers or canoes to carry them, in which case you erase them. You can't find the same animal, plant, or tribal name twice. They say published twice. See, it's weird because the only place they talk about Europe is these returning, but I feel like anything has to be published. And no one else can discover that animal, plant, or tribe once it's published. If there's no muskets in the expedition, no animal bonus can be collected. You will probably want to return to Europe at some point. Well, if you want to win. You may okay. You may retire your explorer at any time for any reason. This is the equivalent of a death. If an explorer dies or is retired, all unpublished discoveries and victory point awards are lost. All unpublished mapped hexes visited only by that explorer are erased. His discoveries are just rumors, and you know nothing. The terrain can change if somebody else most likely will. Player may start a new explorer and begin drawing donations. Yeah, they start off with nothing. The turn after an explorer enters, and this is important because you wouldn't want, like, oh, I got off to a bad start, found the river was too short or something like that. Fuck it. You know, I'm going to restart with another $1,000. The $1,000 is really an acceleration of the beginning game. It's a valuable thing. You'll also get a free ticket to anywhere. It just speeds up that early part of the game, which is why I kind of like it. And it makes it less random early on. On the other hand, it does create the problem, potentially, of people showing up in the same port because of the secret deployment. Oh, where are we? The turn you enter a port, you may return to Europe. It takes a full turn to travel to Europe, so you have to wait at the port for a turn. When you travel to Europe, you must disband whatever's left of your expedition. You will not have anything left. You can't take your canned food or your muskets or anything. While in Europe, you can publish your discoveries. And you may want to do this quicker if somebody else is coming back as well. You may not wish to publish everything. Generally, though, you publish everything at once after you've drawn a few cards. An explorer who's first to map a hex, make a spectacular discovery, or a plant, animal, or name, is not necessarily the person who gets the victory points. It's the one who publishes first. Once it's published, those some of those discoveries can't be republished. None of them can, really. Victory point losses are deducted immediately from the points garnered so far by the current expedition. This is fucked up. Okay, so remember, it costs a point to discharge a sick person. Well, that would be accumulated immediately. Fine, except if they have no victory points garnered, which they won't have unless they published or found diamonds, maybe, or something like it, it'll never go below 0. I'm going to change that. I'm going to allow you to get negative victory points. I don't see why that rule is there. There's a victory point card or chart on the player aid that shows, hey, whatever type of terrain you found. So, for example, if I found a veldt, well, everybody gets a 1 for that except the zoologist, who gets 2 points. That's for each hex that you discovered. You'll get those kind of points. River is additive, oasis, cataract, those are all additive. Then finding the highest mountain or waterfall, these can only, and largest lake, these can only be published if it wins you the game. Because what that means is you have found the highest in, or second or whatever, has been, that's in a published hex in the game. That way you don't keep getting the, I found a lake that's 30 meters bigger. And both people would get the largest bonus if that were the case. That's to prevent that. These down here cover these chits here. Different amounts for different chits. Journalist has the ability to get some special victory points. Every battle in which they defeat a native tribe, they get 1 victory point. Every battle in which the explorer is defeated, the journalist will get 2 victory points. The journalist gets these bonuses only once for each tribe. Put a check on the defeated by the tribe as a reminder that the journalist can no longer receive these victory points in personal battle. If 2 or more journalists are in Africa at the same time, the first back to Europe to publish these battles gets their value. The others are out of luck, however they fought that tribe. The journalist gets 3 victory points for interviewing an explorer by basically getting in the same hex 4 or more hexes from a port with another journalist, or with another explorer. Journalists are allowed to interview each explorer once per game. If 2 journalists get together, they interview each other. Longest river and epic journeys. These, again, can only be done at the end of the game. Well, wait. No. The longest river can only be done at the end of the game. So whichever river that you found, if you found the mouth to the largest river, if you found a hex furthest from the mouth of the largest river system, it's worth 16 victory points, 8 for the second, 4 for the third. The river does not have to be completely mapped, you just have to be the largest published so far. When determining the farthest hex, count the shortest possible route from hex to mouth. Now, that's not as the crow flies, it's as the river travels, because there might be different distances. There are epic journeys. This is going to be the number of hexes published at the same time along the shortest traveled route. Okay, so you get the points for what you traveled, but if in one expedition you're able to connect a couple of ports, you get an additional 1 per hex of how far of the shortest number of hexes that can be traced over what you're just publishing at that point. These can be Khartoum to the Cape Colony ports, Khartoum and any East Coast port north of Durban, Khartoum and any West Coast port north of Cape Town. So basically from Khartoum to any port will count. And between any East and West Coast port north of Cape Town and Durban. So if you cross Africa. These are really cool. You're not going to do them with a canoe expedition. And that's the problem, is the epic journey is only going to be equal to the number of hexes you just published at that time. And each epic journey can only be gotten once. Then, unlike at the start of the game where you start with $1,000, you start in Europe and you decide if you have enough donations to go forward, and then you outfit an expedition. Usually that outfitting happens kind of while other players are taking your turn, but it may take longer than all their turns to figure out what you've got. Free tickets, you can take a free ticket and go someplace. If you don't have a free ticket that goes someplace you want to go, it's going to cost you $500 to go to the port of your choice. There are no donation cards, but most of them have something of use. Let's take a brief look at Game 2. So the big deal here, it allows joint expeditions where 2 explorers work together. It adds a little bit of role-playing. Like if you just hired a guide in a hex, you can't get lost in that hex. You could incorporate these kind of things. They're kind of like, well, that's illogical. He would know his own hex at least, right? Now, most of the rest of this is instead of using the cards, you're using these die roll choices. One of the things here is choice policy 6 is not allowed for interaction with natives. This is going to make it much more likely you're going to get yourself in trouble. Like I said, it is, I think, the most powerful of them all. Combat, you don't use the table. You use some other die roll mechanisms to do that. You don't use the consequence of defeat there. You use another set here. Same with all these other things. You don't use the negotiation table. You roll dice and multiply it by gifts. It's all these different mechanisms to try to reproduce what the charts kind of do. And I just look at them and I say, I don't feel like they're worth the effort. The charts are a pain enough. These other forms, they're made as though it's, you know, some kind of more of a role-playing game or something. The only thing it is that the results are more of a bell curve rather than a step curve. They get rid of the botanist and replace him with the zoologist botanist, and require that you search for information with those characters. You've got things like, you know, an explorer who's sticking around and is making friends with the native tribes might get poisoned. It's interesting. It has a feel kind of more like Down with the King in some ways. It just feels like it's adding too much crap to a game that is at its heart really about the random exploration, and I feel like the base game works well enough. I feel like it's just a degrading of the enjoyable aspects of the game to force you to, like, you know, flip through the rules and work more things. We're going to load this up. And like I said, I'm going to play the base game. I think I'm going to play with 4 characters. I have 4 sheets out there. It'll hold up to 6. It would hold more if you made more color counter sheets. you know? There's nothing in this game that prevents you from, like, you know, if you have the components for it, you could play with like 8 people or something. Wouldn't be a problem, really wouldn't. And I'm sure you could find counters that will work, especially if you're an old-time wargamer and you have tons and tons of blank chits that you've saved, as you should. All right, I will be back